Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Now that Uber has started service in Wichita, the city faces a decision. Will Wichita move into the future by embracing Uber, or will it remain stuck in the past? Uber is a ride-sharing service, although that word doesn't really describe it adequately at all. Here's how it works. People apply to be Uber drivers. Uber then does background checks to its satisfaction. Drivers must have a relatively late model car. And if Uber accepts drivers, they then receive a smartphone with an app installed on it, and they're in business. Now, customers who want to use Uber must have a smartphone. Then customers create an account and make payment arrangements such as credit card, Google Wallet, or PayPal. And then when you, the Uber customer, want a ride, you use your smartphone with the Uber app and make a request. And if Uber drivers are available, they'll accept the request and pick up the passenger. Then at the end of the ride, payment is made through the Uber app. There is no tipping, no need for cash or credit card. Then, after the ride, passengers rate their drivers, and also drivers rate their passengers too. And as a passenger, you can then receive a receipt via email that shows not only the financial details of the transaction, but the route taken by the driver on a map. Now, I've used Uber a few times in Washington, D.C., and was pleased with the experience. No extortion of tips, polite and courteous drivers, clean cars, offers of bottled water each time, a bowl of wrapped candy on the seat beside me, and magazines to read in front of me. People like Uber, especially the young millennials I know that live in cities where Uber operates. And these are the type of people that Wichita is desperately trying to appeal to. So you may be thinking, isn't it great that Uber has expanded to Wichita? Yeah, Uber is great if you value innovation and progress. But not everyone does. I think there's going to be a scuffle. In 2012, 2 years ago, Wichita passed new taxicab company regulations. They create substantial barriers to entering the taxicab market. Some of the most restrictive include these. You have to have a central office staffed at least 40 hours per week, a dispatch system operating 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, enough cabs to operate citywide service, which the city has determined is 10, and you have to have a supervisor on duty at all times cabs are operating. Now, these regulations protect Wichita's existing traditional taxicab industry. There are 3 such companies in Wichita, with 2 having the same ownership. And already, one owner is speaking out against Uber. The taxicab companies that benefit from the restrictive Wichita regulations are likely to fight to keep their competitive barriers in place. The question is this: does Uber fall under the scope of these regulations? Well, so far the city's position is this, according to reporting in the Wichita Eagle. From the government side, interim city attorney Sharon Dickraff said Uber is not a taxi service because the private cars its drivers use are not equipped with taxi meters. Well, I'll expect the city's position to change when the city realizes that Uber cars do indeed have meters. Not clunky old-fashioned meters, but meters running on smartphones that track journeys using GPS. After all, Uber charges for its trips just like traditional cabs. There's a fee to enter the cab, and then charges based on distance traveled and in some cases time. In Wichita, Uber charges a base fare of $2 plus 20 cents per minute and $1.65 per mile, plus a $1 safe rides fee with a $5 minimum. And when you request a ride with Uber using your smartphone app, Uber can give you a fare quote to your destination. Now, the overhaul of Wichita taxi regulations in 2012 was partly inspired by the perception that taxi drivers were not projecting a good image for the city. Now, there are regulations that, in addition to the above, require standards of dress and hygiene and knowledge of the geography of the city and the area and working knowledge of local public and tourist destinations and attractions. Yeah, cabbies must take a customer service class, one delivered by city bureaucrats. So while Wichita has many regulations for the taxi industry, the city failed to enforce a really important regulation, which is that convicted sex offenders should not be taxi drivers. But through the city's mistake, a mistake that the city admitted, one such man was granted a taxi driver license. He's now serving a lengthy prison sentence for raping one of his passengers. Now, the standard argument against Uber is that it is unfair because Uber does not have to follow laws and regulations. But Uber is in fact regulated by a very powerful force, and that is the marketplace. Remember, passengers rate their Uber drivers. Can you rate your traditional Wichita taxi driver? I don't think so. And what if you felt that your traditional Wichita taxi driver was padding the fare by taking a roundabout route? Do you think you could persuade the present taxicab company of that? But Uber trips are monitored by GPS. Passenger receipts have a map that shows the route taken, which could be the basis for a fare review. Yes, the traditional taxi industry complains that Uber does not have to follow laws and regulations, but that's nonsense. Uber drivers must follow traffic laws. Uber drivers and passengers must observe the most fundamental of laws, which is don't hit people and don't take their stuff. Beyond that, the taxi industry laws and regulations are from a bygone era. Now, the traditional taxi industry is comfortable with these laws and regulations. The taxicab companies can cope with them, and they make it difficult for competition to form to challenge the taxi companies. The purpose of these laws and regulations is not to benefit passengers in most cases. Instead, they exist for the benefit of the taxicab industry, and by doing so, they stifle competition and innovation. But there is a transformation underway. Wichita can stop it if it wants to. I'm sure the city, if it wants, can formulate laws that would drive Uber out of Wichita, but that would be a mistake. The city says it is considering whether this industry, Uber in particular, needs regulation. The question I have is this: has the city of Wichita earned the right to regulate taxis? And I think the answer is no. The city has created regulations that prop up the near monopoly of traditional taxicab companies, ones that stifle innovation, but failed to protect passengers from being raped by convicted sex offenders. Beyond that, the city has to decide whether it can back off its heavy-handed regulation and allow market-based innovation to thrive. The city has to decide in favor of customers or the traditional taxi industry and its near monopoly ownership. It's a decision that will let us learn a lot about the future direction of Wichita.